Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you for being here, both online and in the room, of course. And we hope to get more audience in the room because we are people are just taking their coffee break, but we want to be on time. We have a lot of excellent speakers, and we hope that others will catch up with us. And we do know that we have a number of people also watching online, so we want to respect their time to start early. So the name of this session is Moving Gender Data Up the Data Value Chain, from Production to Impact, and is co-hosted by Open Data Watch, my group, Data2X, World Bank, and Ghana Statistical Service, and the Center of Gender Equity and Health in UC San Diego. My name is Sheda Badi, and I'm the Managing Director of Open Data Watch and also Senior Advisor to Data2X, who's been working with us on endlessly on gender data. And I'm pleased to open today's session with just a few words to get us warmed up, and then I'll hand it over to our moderator, Krista. So we have a terrific hour ahead of us. I put the data value chain picture up because it's a beautiful picture, but it's also telling us what we are here today and what we're trying to do. The issue that we are handling is that for gender equality and for overall improvement in our data ecosystem, we need to do much better in filling data gaps for gender. But it's easy said, but it's an absolutely difficult task at hand. And for that, to find out how complicated the whole value chain is for data and what we need to do, we've come up with this tool, the data value chain. And as you see, data travels. Today they were talking about data is power, data is oil, data is data, and is complicated. So it has to go through a lot of steps for data from production to have an impact and be used and reused for gender equality and for making better societies. But we know that we have a lot of SDG and SDG 5 and gender data gaps. But today's discussion is not going to just be focusing on gaps. We want to learn from different partners that we have brought together today on the solutions. And the beauty of the session that we have and the speakers that we have is that we have speakers from various parts of the data value chain to tell us what are some of the solutions and innovations that they have done in moving the data value chain up and forward. So having said that, I think you all appreciate being here. We appreciate the importance of course, gender data and why we are here today and how important it is to hear from our diverse speakers. I just wanted to introduce you now to our amazing moderator, is my colleague, my friend, my co-worker, Krista Baptista-Jones. She's the Executive Director of Data2X, and she's going to be leading us, and we're very grateful, despite the time, for her and other speakers to be here online and in the room. And we're really looking forward to interacting with you. I know there are few of you, but it's not the numbers, it's the quality of the audience that we have. So please engage with us, work with us, and make this session success. Thank you very much, and over to you, dear Krista.
Thank you so much, Sheda, and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to join you today from Washington, D.C., wishing that I was with you there in the room, but happy to be here and happy to join many of you and my colleagues online as well. I'll start by inviting Craig and Yusuf to the stage, and I will be introducing our panelists. I'm moderating the session for today, so we'll have questions for the panelists, followed by time for Q&A from the audience. So for those of you joining virtually, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And for those in the room, we'll look for an opportunity to get your questions as well. As Sheda mentioned, I lead Data2X. We are a civil society organization focused on gender data across the value chain, and in particular, how gender data can improve policy and support gender equality. So let me start. I'm really delighted to be able to introduce our impressive panelists. First, we have Joseph Asunka, who has served as the CEO of Afrobarometer since April 2021. Before this, he was a program officer in the Global Development and Population Program at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Next, we have Anita Raj, the founding director of the Center on Gender Equity and Health at University of California, San Diego. Anita works in the Center on Gender Equity and Health and is also Tata Chancellor's Endowed Professor of Society and Health and a professor in the Departments of Medicine and Education Studies. Next, we have Craig Hammer, who is joining in person. He is the Senior Program Manager with the Development Data Group at the World Bank, where he specializes in governance reforms and, in particular, open government and open data initiatives. And we also have Sharita Sarao joining us. She's a statistician at the Population and Social Statistics section of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. She has nearly 18 years of experience in international development, having started her career with the United Nations Development Fund for Women. And last but not least, we have Mr. Yusuf Marangwa, who's the Director General of the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda, and he is a professional statistician and operational researcher with more than 15 years of experience in statistics development. So welcome to all of our speakers. I'm going to begin with a question for Joseph. Joseph, at Afrobarometer, your work falls outside the official statistics community. How can non-traditional sources of gender data complement data collected by national statistics offices?
All right, great. Thank you so much, Krista, and thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. Thanks to the organizers for having us from Afrobarometer join you today. So briefly, just Afrobarometer, we are a public attitude survey network. What we do is conduct public opinion across about 40 countries on the African continent. And our data collection is mainly to look at people's experiences and their attitudes towards certain issues, whether it is governance, the economy, or livelihood in general. So these are the areas we focus on. So today, what I'm going to talk about just briefly is to see the value of public opinion data and to some extent, independent sources of data, how that can complement official sources of data as we strive to find useful or at least well-designed policies to address some of the challenges that we're all working towards. So first of all, as I said, we collect public attitudes data, and then many data sources do focus on outcomes. In this particular case, what Afrobarometer and other public opinion data does is to provide an additional data point. Sometimes this data point can actually be a reality check on official government statistics. I say an official, I mean a reality check because often when official statistics are provided, you want to find out whether or not what governments are reporting as achievements is actually reflecting in people's lives and how are people experiencing the types of development that governments are implementing in their various countries. And so we go into the field to ask people about their own experiences of some of the development efforts that are conducted. And of course, we also think through what are the gender disparities. If there's access to it, there are differences between males and females in a country across all the 40 countries. So for example, just to give you two areas of outcomes that we've been looking at, or maybe three. Now, we ask people whether in the last year you've gone without medical care. And then we also ask them about internet use, access to digital tools, and also thinking about decision making at the household level in terms of financial or resource control. And we ask these questions because we want to figure out whether or not for some of the basic outcomes that we try to address where there are disparities, are we recording any differences between the two genders? And what we note in general is that when it comes to access and use of, say, technology, or the ability to make decisions at the household level in terms of control of resources, we see big gaps between men and women. Women consistently lag behind men when it comes to these issues. And I think these are the types of data points we want to have as part of national statistics, or at least as a complement to national statistics, so that even though we can record some of the what we call factual data, we also need to know how people are experiencing some of these development efforts that governments do. The second piece is, apart from the outcomes, we also look at evaluations. How are people evaluating and assessing how the governments are performing in different ways, whether they are providing healthcare services, providing education services? How do people evaluate how they experience these services? And this is critically important. So, for example, we talk about where they are services timely, are they effective? Did they have to pay a bribe to get the service? Because these are the things that when you collect government's data at a national level, you don't get to really understand how the provision of services is actually being experienced at the facility level. And so we collect all of this data. And of course, we also look into issues of dignity and respect at the health public service delivery centers. So whether it is education or healthcare, but most importantly, healthcare and how people are treated when they go to access these services. So that's one aspect of it. So allowing people to evaluate the extent to which they access services and the quality of the services that they actually get. In other cases, we also collect data on people's attitudes towards gender equality, advocacy issues. So, for example, should women have equal right to be elected into political office? Should they have the same equal rights to have a job as men? And should they have the same right to own or inherit land in their families? And these are issues also where we see significant gaps between men and women across all the countries that we survey, that women consistently lag behind men when it comes to access to jobs, access to land or to inherit or own land. And the same thing, having the chance to be elected into public office. So these are also data points that we document that can complement official statistics. The last point I want to note here is when it comes to social and political activism, engagement in political discourse, engagement in social activism across the different genders. We ask these questions across the countries that we cover. And what we consistently find when it comes to women's participation in politics and political activity, including voting and elections, we consistently see that gap. Now, there's no country across the 40 countries that we've worked in that we don't see a gap between men and women when it comes to voting. Women always lagging behind men. When it comes to taking political action, women lagging behind men. And of course, there are several drivers behind some of these key issues. But I'm raising these issues because it does allow us to then figure out, okay, if we have national statistic data that show a certain trends generally at the national level, how does that dovetail with what actually happens in people's lives? And that is a complement that independent sources of data, and especially public attitudes data, can contribute to national statistics.
Thank you so much, Joseph. So well said in terms of the ways that this data can complement national statistics offices. Next, I have a question for Anita. Anita, a lot of the work that you do with Emerge creates a repository of gender empowerment measures. How can national statistics offices and civil society organizations utilize that inventory to collect more comprehensive gender data?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very, very, very proud to present or share with you work on Emerge that's really it's an effort of love from a very large team that's multinational. And it's really great to be able to be here with and Afrobarometer and LSMS and a lot of other big organizations that we get to work with to help support the generation of more high quality gender data. So Emerge is a platform. It's available on, it's an open access platform that is really designed to democratize access to best evidence measures of gender equality and empowerment. the measurement space in around gender equality, if you look at it about 10 years ago when we first started this work, what we found was that people were really using different measures, oftentimes making up their items, and nothing was really the same across countries. And it really affected our ability to understand cross-nationally what was happening, unless it was in these large-scale surveys that already existed, which can only include so many measures. So what we did with Emerge was we did create this repository that provides full access to measures that are focused on gender equality and empowerment across a variety of domains: economics, household dynamics, psychology, education, legal, different domains, so that we can provide some insight. There are a few really important issues that have arisen from the work. Number one, what we have found is, because we were scoring the measures, I think that it has really created expanded the discourse globally on the quality of measurement in terms of the testing. So now people can go to the website, including NSOs, go on the website, find measures that show by scoring the ease of use, the quality of measurement, how much it's getting cited, so that as you make the decision about what measure you might want to include in your survey, you have that information. The other thing is that as we've been doing this, we've been able to track where measures are developing and where they're lagging. So economic empowerment, women's economic empowerment, family planning. These are areas where we've really seen an expansion of measurement of empowerment, the ideas of choice, women and girls' choice, their voice, their decision-making engagement, their aspiration setting. Where we see it lagging is also equally important, and we see it lagging in some of the spheres that my colleague from Afrobarometer already mentioned, is, women in politics. I really want to recognize Afrobarometer is leading sort of the thinking about women in politics, and we see huge variation in countries. These are available on the website so that any NSO can get access to the information, including the Afrobarometer measures. And another area is maternal health and maternal well-being. And so I just want to encourage NSOs to be able to access it. We'll put the website on here. I also want to emphasize that one of the things is, when we have the measures available, it can often, it's over 800 measures now, it's close to 900. It can feel absolutely overwhelming. You can get through the system just the construct that you're interested in. So you'll just have a few measures to pick from on a specific concept like gender-based violence. At the same time, this is where we want to support our scholars at NSOs, at universities around the world, to be able to know how to pick the measures that they want for the populations that they want. And to that end, I think we're really trying to fill a gap in that measurement, the value chain you talked about. One, improve that measurement science available to people, the quality and quantity of measures. The other is increase the capacities of the scientists around the world to be able to effectively select their measures and also create measures that account for the local context.
Thank you so much, Anita, for highlighting some of the areas where measurement is lagging, as well as the ways that the Emerge platform can be used. Next, I'm going to go to Craig. Craig, the World Bank's gender data projects help address gender data gaps through multiple entry points. What are some good practices that you've seen that ensure that gender data are processed and effectively disseminated in partner countries and beyond?
Thank you, Krista, very much. And let me first just say that I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my colleagues who are actually leading this work. Anna Beaufort, Heather Moylan, Sarah Bunker. These are the real heroes of the World Bank support for this agenda, and I am standing on the shoulders of giants and being here. So it's a real privilege to be able to have this discussion with you. So just quickly to come to your question, I think what has happened, and several of our colleagues and partners have already alluded to it, is that there's an increasing understanding about the twin challenges of sex disaggregated data processing. And so in many cases, we know that the data are simply not collected. Whereas in others, countries already have collected the necessary data for calculating gender-relevant indicators through their existing surveys, but the data are not being disaggregated. And so identifying a starting point for what kind of support and partnership becomes paramount in terms of importance. And being able to speak in declarative sentences around where along that beautiful value chain the entry point for support should come becomes crucial. And so in terms of good practices, let me quickly talk about two World Bank hosted projects, which are partnership driven and it's supported by several donors, including the Gates Foundation. One is the Strengthening Gender Statistics Project, and the second is the Living Standards Measurement Study Plus, the LMS Plus project. They partner with National Statistical Offices to increase the availability and quality of gender data. And what, in our estimation, the opportunities to kind of parse lessons from these experiences really come in first, they implement gender data gap assessments. There is a wonderful methodology to be able to identify these gender data gaps. And there is a wealth of resources available to be able to replicate this if you go to the Strengthening Gender Statistics website. But by starting with a gender data gap assessment and then moving on to training programs on how to use statistical software to disaggregate by sex and other characteristics, to be able to help support capacity building in terms of standards and definitions for collecting and harmonizing private sector data and survey data to be able to help close these gaps, and provide additional technical training and targeted support, which is relevant in the context in which you are working, can really help move the needle on being able to add a huge amount of value in this space. And it, given the different places where our country partners are, ensuring that your support is customized is crucial. And then also looking at tying this into longer term, more durable support, which is something I hope we can talk about also. I think as we've been discussing in some of these other sessions, this is an area which is subject to underfinancing and it needs a great deal more support. And so to the extent that you can tag assessment to tactical capacity building, to longer term partnerships and implementation, the likelihood of being able to generate long-term value increases dramatically. In terms of on data dissemination efforts, let me just quickly say, the World Bank Group has scaled up its data curation and dissemination efforts. Some of you may know that we launched the new gender data portal in the last year. It's the World Bank hosted comprehensive source for historical and current data, which is disaggregated by sex, and serves as a global resource for all types of data users, from researchers to journalists to policymakers. And it is right now, it's open access to more than 1,000 indicators compiled from officially recognized international sources that cover demography, education, health, economic activities, assets, leadership, gender-based violence, and more. And it comes with an interactive visual suite of visual tools and resources that can enable use and uptake of the data, visualization of the data, to enable much more, well, mass public consumption of not just the data, but the insights it's generating. And the good practice opportunity here also is to try to attach more engagement opportunities with these data and ensure that it's not just about releasing them into the wild, but also working with partners, intermediaries, to be able to translate that data into insights, into knowledge, into decision processes, and ensuring that these data are able to drive these policy processes in the medium to long term.
Thank you so much, Craig, for highlighting the work that the World Bank is doing and some of those use cases and examples. Next, I have a question for Sharita. You and your colleagues have worked on bridging the data to policy divide. Given your experience, how can an enabling and supportive environment be created at the national level to facilitate and encourage gender data use in policymaking?
Thank you, Krista, and greetings from Bangkok, everyone. I'm very honored and pleased to have this opportunity to share experiences from some of the work that we have done in the Asia-Pacific region to facilitate gender data use in policymaking. Now, in response to the specific question from Krista, as we know, solutions to enhance gender data use can take a variety of forms. And at ESCAP, we've centered our efforts at bridging the policy data divide, as Krista mentioned, or promoting policy data integration, as we call it. And this has involved linking the production of gender data directly to issues and target groups as contained in existing national gender equality policies or strategies. And the idea here is to enhance the continued use of gender data, firstly by ensuring that data produced in national statistical systems directly responds to gender policy demands, and secondly, by identifying, establishing, and sustaining the demand for such data right from the downstream end of the official statistics production process, so that even before a data collection exercise is launched, national statistical offices and systems should ideally make the effort to understand where the demand for gender data comes from, what the demand is at the national level, and whether the data already being produced adequately responds to such demand. And if not, how can any unmet demand for such data be addressed? So let me try to unpack this a bit more. Now, many national statistical systems are typically stuck in the vicious cycle of not only insufficient supply of comprehensive and high quality data and statistics, which is often the problem we focus on, but there is the less recognized problem of inadequate demand for data. Policy agencies do not typically communicate their data needs with data producers. Information gaps exist as development policies in themselves are not always specific enough about population groups and issues for target interventions. And at the same time, development policies often lack monitoring and indicator frameworks specifying disaggregated data needs. All of this can either lead to inadequate data or data that is not specifically useful for policy, and the latter obviously results in data waste. And these issues become particularly relevant in the context of gender data, which as we already know, is often not even prioritized in data collection or is at best generated only as an afterthought. Now, creating and establishing demand for data therefore calls for a systematic feedback cycle. It calls for regular engagement of data producers with users from an early stage in the official statistics production process. And it is with this idea in mind that ESCAP had launched the Gender Policy Data Integration Initiative back in 2018 to support and promote systematic and purpose-driven engagement between gender data users and producers. And this process at the time was supported by a tool called EPIC, or Every Policy is Connected, which was still under development at the time. We had a whole team of us working on this tool, and then we applied this tool on a set of countries. So through national workshops in the Philippines, in Vietnam, and Armenia, national statistical officers took lead in convening other official statistics producers, line ministries, and national planning agencies, and together they conducted content analysis of existing gender equality policies and strategies. And this process led to streamlining of information and disaggregated data needs, including identification of population groups most likely to be left behind. And then these information needs were mapped onto existing indicators already established at the national, regional, and global levels, including the SDG indicators, to eventually consolidate a comprehensive set of gender-related indicators for the country with appropriate levels of disaggregation. So just to make this all a little bit tangible, let me give you a few quick examples of what this process achieved in the 3 countries we worked in. In the Philippines, we use this process to consolidate a preliminary set of indicators in women's economic empowerment to monitor related issues in the Magna Carta for Women, which is the comprehensive women's rights law in the Philippines. And the process also helped to identify missing issues of priority concern for potential inclusion in future revisions of this law. In Vietnam, the process was used to refine the second draft of the National Statistical Indicators on Gender and Development, for which they had a mandate from the Prime Minister's office at the time to ensure the availability of disaggregated data to effectively monitor the 2006 gender equality law. And similarly, in Armenia, the process helped determine data needs for monitoring the 2013 law on equal rights and equal opportunities for women and men. So in conclusion, by consolidating a national set of gender-related indicators through this process in all of these 3 countries, the expectation was that these indicators would eventually be integrated into the national monitoring and evaluation system. And this in turn could serve as an accountability tool to mobilize political support and investments needed by essentially creating demand for data. In this case, we're talking about gender data, in the context of national development priorities rather than for international reporting alone. And by identifying, generating, and sustaining such domestic or local demand for data, the responsiveness of national statistical systems to gender policy demands can be strengthened, and this in turn can ensure that the gender data produced in the country is eventually useful for related policymaking. So I'll stop with that, Krista, and back to you.
Thanks so much, Sharita. Really exciting examples across those three different geographies and the ways that data can be linked to policy. Last but not least, I have a question for Yusuf. Yusuf, what is needed to ensure all the different stages of the data value chain that we've spoken about today are sustainably and effectively financed at the national and global levels?
Yeah, thank you very much. Open Data Watch and partners for organizing this important session. I think it's about time that we make good progress in gender statistics and gender data. We've been working on this for quite some time, but we've not seen the progress that we need to see. I think what we need to do, especially to have the statistics produced, used, but especially funded, is we need to mainstream. We need to mainstream gender statistics and data into national programs for statistics development, but also the mechanisms that we put in place to fund those mechanisms, to fund those programs. But especially at national level, because if we have statistics at national level, most likely we'll have the statistics at global level. In developing countries' context, we know that for some time now, about 10, 15, 20 years, we've been having very good programs for statistics development. We call those programs National Strategies for Development of Statistics. And it's from these strategies that we get guidance on what we need to do in the next 5 years, then another 5 years, and so on and so forth. And we also use these strategies to fund those programs. And it's very important that gender statistics is not taken in isolation. We need to mainstream gender statistics in all activities in those strategies. From the production perspective, we program so many statistics production activities, very many surveys, living standard surveys, labor force surveys, agriculture surveys. We program a lot of administrative statistics, from education to civil registration to statistics in the health sector, and so many other things, censuses, and now big data. So we need to make sure that gender statistics is mainstreamed at the production level. And also at the capacity building level. We do a lot of capacity building activities, both for producers of official statistics, but also for users of official statistics. It's very important that as we program capacity building, we also program capacity building for gender statistics, both production and use. In fact, nowadays we see a lot of challenges in terms of capacity at the use level. Even where we have a lot of statistics, we still see challenges in using those statistics effectively. There's an area that was not catered for very well in the past, which is at the highest level of the value chain. This is dissemination, communication, and engagement. After we produce the statistics and we build capacity for both users and producers, then we need to disseminate effectively. And effective dissemination requires resources, and engagement requires resources, and also making sure that we communicate effectively what those statistics mean. So at all those levels of production, capacity building, and engagement, we need these things to be mainstreamed and sustained over time to make sure that we see the progress that we need to see going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yusuf, for that answer. We are now taking questions from the audience, so we'll shift to that. So if you are participating virtually, please feel free to put your additional questions in the chat. And for those of you in the room, let us know and we'll come to you if you have questions. I'm going to start the audience questions with a question for Joseph. And Joseph, with regard to the public opinion and attitudes data and analysis that Afrobarometer has produced, how has that been received by the NSO offices, the National Statistics Offices? Has there been pushback? Has it been well received? And where have you seen that's worked well in terms of identifying a positive path for collaboration?
All right, thanks so much again, Krista. And I think public opinion data, we started generating this data since 1999, and I think by and large, National Statistics Office in general has found it quite challenging to figure out best ways to integrate this data in their data sources. And I think the main places where we find opportunity for moving forward is within the UN system and tracking the Sustainable Development Goals indicators, as well as the Africa Agenda 2063 indicators. We also have the Africa Peer Review Mechanism indicators, which are essential for tracking governance outcomes on the continent. So what we've been able to do quite to some levels of success has been engaging with the UNECA to figure out ways that Afrobarometer data can be put side by side with government statistics that report on progress on some of these targets, whether it is the Sustainable Development Goals indicators or it is the Africa Agenda 2063 or the Africa Peer Review Mechanism. So that is where we've seen some success. Of course, there's always been some pushback because then the reality check that this data provides on official statistics can be a little uncomfortable for governments. And so we often see cases where governments are not too comfortable with having this data sit side by side with official statistics. But of course, we can try to make the case that our data does provide the opportunity to generate debate, because where there is consistency between our data, the public attitudes data, and official data, then that would actually reaffirm the fact that, yes, the official statistics is really reflecting what people actually feel on the ground. Where there's a gap between what we find in public attitude data and the actual statistics data. Let me give an example. You may have a country where we say electricity coverage is 90% across the country. And that can be reported in official statistics in terms of coverage of electricity. But when you go into people's households and ask, how many hours do you get electricity in a day? That can be a different, it's the quality of electricity they actually get. And so when you have a gap between official statistics that shows this gap, there's coverage, and then there's a gap in the quality, we think that is where, so we try to make the case to statistics office that this is the value that data that we collect can bring into these spaces. We have not really had much success with official the National Statistics Office adopting this data, but we continue to engage with them to make the case for why they would need this data.
Thank you so much, Joseph. This is such an important set of experiences that you have, and this idea of continuing to push the dialogue forward makes so much sense, and have that conversation. Next, I'm going to go to Sharita. Sharita, given the work that you talked about in the 3 countries, what have you seen are some factors, some enabling factors or challenges for a national level uptake of the policy data integration process you outlined?
Krista, sorry, we also have questions from the room. So after Sharita, maybe we move to the room.
Sounds good. Thank you, Shada.
Thank you very much. I'm Leila Ben Ali, Head of Statistics Division in the South African Union Institute for Statistics. African Union. But it's a small comment. It's not really a question, but I would like to start by appreciate the presentation made by the auditor audience. It's very important information that we get, but it's a small comment that I want to add, that when we focus on the building capacity of the producer and user, we have to bring them together and create this dialogue between producer and user to and user and especially for the specialists on gender to facilitate production of gender statistics. Maybe I can give you a small information about the experience of African Union in Africa. Since long time we established this course or training to establish this dialogue between producer and user for the production of gender statistics. And it gave a good experience to enhance the capacity of producer to understand what means gender perspective. Because the problem of producer, and as a statistician and also specialist on gender, there is a missing of understanding what means gender perspective. Because for as a statistician, we always think about the disaggregation between men and women or on female and male, but it's more comment dirais-je, more it's above this disaggregation. We have to go above. It means that we have to encourage member states or the countries to conduct the time use survey, because the time use survey, it's very important to have this figure on the role played by women and men, and also sensitize the policymakers for better planning and development of policy.
Thank you, sir. Those were great points, both the user-producer dialogues and also the importance of what you learn, like the importance of time use survey. Krista, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt that, but maybe this comment could be integrated into the comments that our panelists will have going forward. Maybe we can go back to the Sherita. Sherita, sorry, continue.
Thank you. Thank you. Very relevant comments from the floor there. This is very much in line with what we were promoting through our policy data integration work. It's the idea really was to bring users and producers around the table and identify data needs even before data collection is undertaken. So just going back to the question that Krista put to me on enabling factors or challenges for national level uptake of such a policy data integration process, a critical impediment that we faced in implementing this work at the national level was the lack of leadership in recognizing the policy data disconnect and the lack of convening power of national statistical offices in initiating dialogue or consultation with policy agencies and data users. We basically found the national statistical offices in most cases lacked a central position of authority to actually invite relevant policy agencies around the table for such engagement. And they also considered it to be outside of their mandate. So it is critical here for NSOs to position themselves as an integral part of policy-related discussions in order to identify related data needs and ensure policy-relevant data is produced. And this issue becomes particularly relevant for gender because as a cross-cutting issue, it really involves all sectors in the country. You really have to engage with a large number of sectors and large number of stakeholders, and therefore the convening power of the National Statistical Office becomes even more critical in such a circumstance. Also, for this process to be successful, line ministries must be in a position to understand and articulate their own data needs. So unless they're able to communicate their data needs with producers, obviously, policy responsive data cannot be produced. And here, again, data literacy of these agencies becomes very important. For the EPIC process itself, the tool that we used, One prerequisite for this process to be undertaken is that relevant policy documents, like in this case, gender strategies or policies, must be available in the country. And we found that in many cases, while the National Statistical Offices were our counterparts at the national level, they had very limited knowledge on existing national gender equality policies and strategies in the country, which kind of revealed to us how disconnected the data that they were producing was in reality from the policy documents that existed in the country. And last but not the least, a policy data integration process such as the one I outlined is time consuming. It is resource intensive, it is time consuming, and high level officials need to buy into such a process so that they can provide support to the technical staff to invest enough time to complete the process. And this is not a one-time process, it's an iterative one and needs to be repeated every time a new policy is available or needs to be formulated or monitored. Thanks, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Sharita. I want to ask a general question to the panelists. So this question is about, and it kind of ties into these comments about bringing together producers and users. How do we ensure that stakeholders along the data value chain are collaborating and making sure that gender data is being collected, analyzed, and then used? Where have we seen successes? Where have we seen, challenges? So I will open that up to the panelists and perhaps start with Craig and Yusuf, if either of you would like to comment on that, and then we can go to the virtual panelists.
That's a very interesting question. How do we make sure that users and producers engage and be productive in that engagement? I think the most important thing here, one of the biggest challenges that we see is that producers, Leila from the African Union mentioned it, producers, especially statisticians, they look at gender statistics as a matter of disaggregation. And they miss something. And users struggle to identify what they need in terms of statistics. And to fix that, even before you convene them to start engaging, you have to cover that gap from both sides. And that's why we've been struggling from experience. For example, every time we try to develop a strategy for developing statistics for the next 5 years, we call the sectors, we call all sectors, including the ministries that are in charge of gender and family promotion. And while engaging them, we can see that they struggle to tell us what they want us to plan for the next 5 years. So if they struggle at that level, it's automatic. What they need is going to be missing in the actions that we are going to take in the next 5 years. So capacity building is very important, both from the producers and the users' perspective, so that we are aware of what we need to do and focus on that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Krista. Maybe just briefly, I think it's also useful to remember that collaboration can be arm's length. It can also mean disagreement, because engagement around even competing priorities can still enable important dialogue and can identify and articulate demand in ways that aren't always harmonious. And so to the extent that we're talking about different demographics of users, and we've been talking, I think, it's been mentioned in this section, in this discussion around the opportunity to potentially work with journalists and politically aligned think tanks and NGOs, issue NGOs and academics and others. It's contributing to the public discourse around issues that people care about or people have an opinion about. And it forces or enables, let's say, public discussion, consumption of data and data informed insights. It enables more give and take, and it helps enable participation in some of these discussions in ways that just more traditional engagement cannot. So, as we're thinking about this, it's useful to remember that growing connective tissue can also mean arm's length engagement between these different constituencies. And in order to do that, being able to create opportunities to access data, making data open, making it accessible, providing tools and resources to be able to translate that data into insights and knowledge, can enable or stimulate this kind of engagement. And that's a form of collaboration, but it's still driving discussion and progress toward policy reforms forward.
Great, thank you so much, Craig.
Krista,
Yeah.
there is another question in the room. If we could take that, is that time for it?
I think, yes, one last question from the room.
One
Sure.
last question. Okay, I'll give the microphone to her. Can you make it short?
Thank you. I'm Andrea Arenas from UNDP. And my question is that because sometimes many policies for social justice, in particular for gender equality, are not politically feasible because there are many stakeholders and power dynamics. And I wonder, in your experience, what needs to happen for gender data to allow more space for political visibility for these kind of policies? Thank you.
Great. Whoever of the panelists that would like to jump in, please do so to answer that question.
Can you all hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. I think one of the I was thinking about this question of the producers and the users, and with recognition that the users are going to be the people who are wanting to have the data for purposes of advocacy or policy development, policy generation. So one of the things I think is a real struggle is oftentimes the data to produce that data, it takes time, to make the questions, to get it out in the field. And oftentimes it's not necessarily aligned with where the users are in terms of what they need when they need it. And oftentimes what the users need when they need it, we might even have as data producers, but we are not having that conversation. So I want to, just say that I agree with you so much that these are groups that need to be talking to each other more. But I think that is probably key, is that I think too often we're making our value chain based on, okay, we produce the data and then it goes to the user without the feedback loop of how the user can guide what we're producing or prioritizing. So that's one piece I think is really key. The other thing I was going to say is that as someone who's worked with NSOs, we've done some surveys, and I shout out to Uganda, Kenya, and India, who've been great partners for us. These are really the NSOs have so much data collection. They have so much data collection, and they are on really, really rapid timelines. So, and they're trying to get the data out as well as they can, and with as much quality, and the sampling has to be really good. And so adding this, how do you do, this is what gender equality is, these are the kind of measures you should use. In a way, it does create it creates a burden. And one of the, I think, tough things is when there's a topic of interest, it comes and it bubbles based on it necessarily had the workforce that had the time, the training, the interest, or that political interest in this moment is really going to translate to political will or at the higher levels of the office. So I think partnership with NSOs is so important, because I think there are ways, we've had a really positive experience where we work with them as partners so that when the data come, we're helping translate it. I know Afrobarometer, they work with each team and country to create the briefs. And I think that has to be part of it. This issue of the resources going into how to prioritize the measures, how to then write them up, how to translate them, that is not a small thing. And even hearing from the users to have that feedback back, to expect the NSOs to do that alone is that's really burdensome. And I think this is where the onus is on us to actually, those from academia and NGOs, to really bolster that infrastructure to make sure that we do have a true feedback loop in our system.
Thanks so much, Anita. Really appreciate that, those insights and those connections, and the way that things fit together. We're going to do a speed round for our panelists. So in 30 seconds, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to answer what is one thing that you want the audience to take away from this session. So we are going to go to Joseph first.
All right, so I think the key thing to take away is to always remember to ask ourselves when we engage in whether it is policy discourse or thinking about data that we have, especially when it comes to policy decisions. Like, is there a difference in the impact of this particular policy on men and women? So no matter how rich the data is that we have in front of us and making decisions, if we don't consciously ask ourselves all the time, what is the potential differential impacts between men and women, we may continue to miss it. So I think it's always important, anytime you're in a space, you can have the final say in a discussion. Let's ask that question. Do we think this can affect men and women differently? And I think that will help us to, be able to drive policies that are more responsive to gender differences.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. Next, Anita.
Sorry. Yeah, I hope, because I think this is what I've gotten out of this session, is that recognizing that NSOs cannot do this alone, and that the onus is on us, those of us who want to partner with NSOs, to make that relationship happen, but also to really have platforms like this where we actually have the ability to have NSOs hear of the resources we have, such for us, it's the Emerge platform, and know that when these charges come to their plate, there are resources, there are partners that are interested in being able to support the work, so that it's not like they have to take it on all by themselves.
Great, thank you. Craig.
Thanks, Krista. So I just going to use my time to agree with Yusuf. I think the most important takeaway is the need to be able to mainstream this set of priorities into support for official statistics and to be able to ensure this is a normative component of what NSOs do. The good news, I think, is that we're seeing increasing investments from organizations, including mine, into efforts to do that. And so on the World Bank side, we know, for example, that if you're looking at pipeline and current commitments in our portfolio, new support for official statistics is now in the range of 1.3 billion over the next couple of years, and this includes a mainstreamed gender data component. And so we're very optimistic and very hopeful that the work that we've been discussing today, that there were opportunities to ensure that we're working together in order to advance this agenda, and to do more in a more consistent fashion, so that as important as this agenda is, it is not discrete, it's not standalone, it's brought into the center of this official support moving forward.
Great. Sharita.
Yes, thanks, Krista. My views are very much aligned with the other panelists. So, we've said it over and over again that a lot of data is produced in NSOs, but at the same time, we have to recognize that a lot of data is wasted because it's not really useful for policy. And from that perspective, obviously, there is need to overcome the tendency towards business as usual in NSOs. We need a paradigm shift in national planning and monitoring processes. There is need to integrate a regular feedback cycle with systematic engagement between producers and policy counterparts, not just at the upstream end of the official statistics process, but basically throughout the process. So unless we integrate this throughout the process, we are not producing the right data. And obviously, if we don't have the right data, data is not being used. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you. And last but not least, Yusuf.
I think consistency is very important, and medium to long-term focus. It's very difficult to get good progress with short-term ad hoc interventions. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been such an exciting conversation, and I think I speak for everyone here when I offer sincere thanks to all of our panelists for your insights and your experiences. Your observations and insights have given us so much to think about and also a lot to do. It's clear that we know how to close gender data gaps. For example, Data2X recently released a report on transforming the data landscape, solutions to close gender data gaps. And it details over 100 practical, accessible ideas for national statistics offices and partners that can be implemented to make progress right now. And if you add that to the list of everything we've said here, there's quite an impressive amount of work that we can share on how to create this enabling environment. And how do we do that? How do we create an enabling environment for the successful implementation of gender data solutions? Funding must be the first priority. Compared to the previous years, worldwide gender data financing dropped by 55% in 2020. And we can't expect progress until we reverse that trend and ensure adequate and sustainable financing. Second, progress requires robust data governance. That means adoption of strategies, legal mandates regulating the collection, dissemination, and use of gender data, and increasing government's technical capacity to do the work. And finally, progress requires political support. Gender data can only drive equity gains if policymakers use it to make better, more equitable policy choices, as we've heard about today. And this requires both political leadership from within national governments and effective advocacy by CSOs and other non-governmental institutions. So these are really big challenges, as we've highlighted. But I think there's a lot of reason for hope. And that's why it's so important to continue bringing together groups like this, to bringing leaders together and into the conversation. And we must all commit to taking the insights shared today back with us and pushing for financing, governance, and political reform that's required to put data to work as an engine of gender equality across the world. So thank you all once again for your time, and it's been a pleasure to join you for this panel.
And thank you. Thanks, Krista. Thanks from the floor here for all of you to stay up or join us early, and for our in-person panelists. And I also wanted to take an opportunity to thank our hosts and organizers and all the IT and volunteers who are in the room to help us. But last but not least, this beautiful audience here who have come to our session to talk about the value of gender data, and hopefully we will all together integrate this topic even for discussions within the World Data Forum and within the data community. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of the day. We have a long day here still to go. So have a good evening, Krista, and have a good time, everybody. Bye.